Hello, and welcome to One Week Critiques, the interview series. This is episode 26, and I am joined today by Jessica Guzman. Welcome, Jessica.
Thanks for having me.
Jessica is the author of Adelante, which was published by Switchback Books in 2020 and selected by Patricia Smith as the winner of the 2019 Gatewood Prize. Currently, Jessica reads for Memorias and teaches at Widener University, where she co-coordinates the creative writing program. So to start off the interview today, I thought I just might ask you, how would you describe your practice of writing and revising in general?
Sure. So for me, I consider myself a very slow writer, not just in that I don't produce often. I've tried, but have never successfully done something like a poem a day, other than perhaps a stanza here or there a day. But also, when I'm writing a poem, I'm very line by line. So I will often revise a lot in the moment. So I won't get like a whole draft down and then kind of go back to it. Instead, I will often free write for a little bit and then pull an image from the free write to start. And then I'll kind of just, go line by line, revising a line or two at a time until it feels right. So by the time a draft of the poem is done, even though I still go through a revision process afterwards, a lot of what I've got has actually already been revised significantly just in the process of getting a single poem out. So it's kind of maybe a bit of a strange process, at least compared to a lot of other poets I know.
Yeah, do you find that you're just more comfortable in this kind of deliberate atmosphere? Like, as you said, the free write, and then you get something, an image to build from, but then you're very deliberate, like in the steps you take.
Yes, I think so. For me, it might also be the reason why my poems have a tendency to be very orderly, perhaps not in content, perhaps not even an image, but at least formally. So I do write in received form. I wouldn't say the majority of my work is in received form, but I'm comfortable writing in received form. I know not all writers are, and I'm often kind of very comfortable with lines that are roughly around the same length, even numbers of stanzas, even when stanzas are going to have different numbers of lines in them. You'll find, and I think the poem that we're looking at today is like that, where there's still a kind of pattern to them. So I feel very comfortable, I think, with restrictions. And I think that's part of kind of my deliberate approach to writing and revision, that the restrictions for me are freeing.
So today we're going to talk about predictions of the material from your collection. This was initially published on poets.org, Poem a Day. First, we are going to look at the first draft, though. So I will bring up that first draft here and ask you to read it. All right, whenever you are ready.
Predictions of the material. Before the wick rejects the flame, before the glass salts the waters, or the rental en route to your funeral stalls, between islands, I turn the burner high in anticipation, olive oil dollop ready to smother the pan, when a moth plummets to the blushing element, wings immediately charred. Let me tell you, more than once in a parked car, I've held the searing buckle to my chest, as a lottery ticket jams a drawer, as dawn reveals the fish in the pelican's jaw.
All right, thank you. So, the majority of this first draft remains in the published version, but there's many lush details that are added, particularly about your dog, the landscape. How did you go about enriching this poem? And how do you think about materials as predicting what will come?
So for this particular poem, I remember writing this version of it, I think I may have had an image or two that I had written down at some point that I was like, I need to use that later. I feel there's an energy to it. There's something there to explore. And I pulled one of those. I happened to be at the Community of Writers poetry workshop that week. And I pulled one of those to try to prompt my poem for the day that I needed for that day's workshop. And this is kind of what came out, this version. And again, I was thinking very kind of especially for this poem, step by step, which I think you can see formally happening with the lines, indented lines versus left justified lines. But after that initial drafting period, it felt like there was a disconnect between the sections of the poem, if that makes sense. So kind of starting out with that initial anaphora, reaching the searing buckle right inside the car, that kind of turn there with let me tell you, all the way down to the pelican's jaw and the fish. I thought all of those images were resonating with the feeling I was trying to explore about grief, about trying to reach back and trying to find an answer, right? Because it's what we do. We know answers don't exist, but we look for them anyway. And I was looking for so many answers in this poem regarding my father's death. And so in kind of searching back and trying to find that answer, I didn't feel like I had searched back far enough. And I had these pieces, but they weren't, it also wasn't clear just how far back I wanted to search. I wanted to go back to childhood. And that wasn't happening in this version. There wasn't enough space for it to happen. So I really, when I approached revision, I was thinking, no, I need to add a lot more. I need to take more time getting from one section, so to speak, or one turn to the next.
Right. Well, the final version is definitely a lot longer, right? The final version is 8 stanzas compared to the 1 stanza in this particular poem. What do you think adding more anaphora allows to happen in the poem?
Well, first, I just have a bias in favor of anaphora. Let me just say, I think anyone who reads my book will know that. And I still do that a lot in poems that I've been writing recently. I love anaphora because I think anaphora, I think a lot about chanting, about it's almost like a kind of ritual, I guess, where through the anaphora, it allows my mind to go places it wouldn't go otherwise, allows me to make connections I might not otherwise make. And so in this case, I initially went forward with the anaphora simply as a tool. It was really just a tool to try to see, okay, how can I make this longer? What else might I include? If I do try to keep going back, where do I get? Where I end up? And it was only through that anaphora that I even come to the line that mentions anaphora in the poem. I don't think I would have come to that conclusion any other way, except that I kept using the anaphora to go farther and farther and farther until finally I was like, what am I even trying to do here? Like, what do I think I'm going to find? I don't want to say nothing, but I'm not going to find the answer I'm looking for. Not really. It can't be found. It doesn't exist. And so I think for me, yeah, that's an answer, right?
Oh, it's definitely an answer. I was thinking like that ties in with the answer you just gave to the last question about how that restriction actually opens something up because you keep going with that restriction as long as you can, right? And then finally something just like dawns on you and maybe you don't even know it at the time, right? And it just like comes out and you're like, oh, wow, that this is where it was going. I'd like to ask you about the Community of Writers. How did the particular workshop for this poem go? Who was the workshop leader that day? And what were some of the comments that you were given? If you can remember them, of course.
Is it awful to say I may not be able to remember them?
No, it's been several years, right? So
it's been a few years. I want to say this poem was for Kazim Ali's workshop. And to be honest, I don't really remember very much other than it confirmed for me that there was a disconnect, that the turns were not meaningful because there wasn't enough time for anyone to really feel the images resonating off one another, or enough time to really understand how one leads to the other. And the pelican image is actually an image that has been stuck in my mind for years before this poem even existed, because it's just incredibly striking to me. When I saw, an image once of just this pelican, just like on a dock somewhere. I grew up in Florida, so there's just beaches and docks and pelicans everywhere. So I saw this pelican somewhere. I don't even remember where anymore, but it just struck me so much, kind of being able to see, um, this fish. Like, he hadn't swallowed it yet. I don't know what the pelican was doing, hanging out, I guess. But
He was letting it marinate, you know?
that's true. That's true. I enjoy my food. Why wouldn't a pelican? So, I knew that there was something significant about that image that I saw when I was younger. And so I've carried it for a long time. Um, and so when it was clear, kind of introducing it, and it's a very loving, I don't know about the prose workshops, but the poetry workshop, I think you've been to the community of writers, right?
Right.
Um, yeah. So, it's a very kind of supportive space. It's all about generating work and pushing it forward. It's not really about harsh critique. So it was mostly just a lot of praise for the things people liked, but clear to me that the ending was not landing. And it mattered to me that it was not landing.
Well, one thing that I think definitely lands in this poem, particularly in the revised version, which we'll get to here in a little bit, is I keep noticing at the end of each line, there's always a very stark, weighty word that offers some sort of view or insight on the poem, even if you weren't to read the whole poem, but just to read the end lines. I feel like I would have a certain experience, right, with the poem just by doing that. Would you say you focus on having a really strong end word, or what are your thoughts on that? And how do you think about end stops versus line breaks within your own work?
That's such a great question, and also a very generous reading. Thank you. I care about them a lot, and I think my process probably also suggests that, with the way I'm kind of line by line. I spend a lot of time thinking about where the line ends and where the line begins. And I also like to think of the line as, I don't want to say a mini poem, but I think the line by itself should do something, or at least that's what I aim to do in my work. So I want the line on its own, no matter if it's a combination of sentences, like the ending of one sentence with the beginning of another, or if it is just a part of a sentence, or rarely a full sentence in and of itself. I think it needs to do something. So because of that, I do spend a lot of time thinking about where it's ending and how a line, just independent of all the other lines around it, can be read. So that's something that I pay a lot of attention to. Not necessarily thinking that I'm going to create meaning with just the end words of each line, though I love that. And wish I could say that was more intentional. But I think that attention perhaps occasionally, if I'm lucky, leads to that.
Definitely. I mean, I think it does. I'm a fan. Although we haven't read it yet, I'm still going to ask this question, meaning this comes from the revised poem. In the revised poem, your father speaks in the final stanza where before he was silent. Also, the pelican is no longer eating the fish, right? The memory that you have stored for years and years, but instead is caught in a trap, only revealed in the darkening twilight. So I find this ending just an amazing edit to this poem. And I wondered what happened in the time between first writing the poem, thinking over time about what has happened, remembering things, reading, you mentioned in the poem a day that you had been reading Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, right? Like, how do you eventually work up to this final image?
That's a great question. I think, well, I will say I kind of kept the title, which is a direct quote from the translation of 100 Years of Solitude that I was reading. I kind of kept that saved on like the notes function on my phone for a while, thinking about what it meant for right, the material to predict anything at all, or to just respond to things. And I think this comes partially from my own connection, my own family's connection, I suppose, to just Latin American cultures, where my parents are from Cuba, and I was kind of raised with a slightly different perspective on what is possible in the material world, I think, because of that. And so this is just a moment in Marquez's novel that resonates with me and always resonated with me. And for this particular poem, it felt right that I was kind of going back to those moments and kind of thinking about the very material world and what it meant to um, kind of have power or have the material world and, exert a certain type of power, right? So like, the wick rejecting the flame, and the glass salting the waters, like kind of, these inanimate or seemingly inanimate objects exerting influence, having power, and kind of getting complicated then with the dog, who is his own kind of power, right? Or at least to the anthill he is.
Right.
And then just even the ants themselves, like where, and then looking down and being like, oh no, there's gonna be so many ants, and they're not. Like, again, this kind of, I don't know, how things feel magical sometimes, I suppose. And as I was writing and kind of using the anaphora to push me forward and forward, getting towards the ending, one of the things I was very aware of, and this was actually one of the last poems that I finished for the book. And one of the things I was very aware of was my own voice and my own approach and perspective on what happened, versus different family members. And for the most part, I was fine with it. But I kept kind of going back to what my father would think of some of the poems that I was writing, what he might think about this kind of desire of mine to even find these predictions, to even try to find, answers to something. And it led me, I think, along with the anaphora that really led me to childhood, back to the truth of my childhood, which is I was a sensitive child and I cried for everything. I was such a crier. And every single time I would cry, both my parents would be like, are you crying again? Like, again? What is it now? Because I was just sensitive and things bothered me. Or, I would like get my feelings hurt by things. Or I would get sad because something happened. And so I think so much of it, again, kind of leading to all this anaphora and where do I think I'm going with it? And am I going to find an answer? I'm finally getting to, anaphora is not going to give me the answer I'm looking for. I can't find it. And then from there, kind of switching to what would my father say about all of this? Probably the same thing he often said to me, which is, oh, are you just crying about this again? Like, move on. Maybe not move on, but, a little gentler than that, because he was always very gentle with me, but still. So I think that's part of what kind of led to his voice. And it allowed then the image with the fish and then the pelican to resonate in a way that it simply wasn't resonating before.
Definitely, definitely. I really enjoyed that answer. And it harkens back to your earlier comment about how, as humans, we constantly search for answers or like reasons things have happened, and like in some respect, we think logic is like the one thing that will truly show us how to understand the world. When I feel like, right, the world's so much more complicated than that in some ways, that it will never actually give us that answer. But yet, to do nothing is also not, a functional thing for us to do either, right? So like we're in this strange limbo area where we try to go as far as we can in the logic, and then sometimes that breaks down, but allows us to really look at an object or an image, right, and see what it might be there, right? And I think like that's one of the things that's happening, especially with the anaphora in the poem.
I love that reading of it.
Well, good, because you're about to read it. Yes, if you wouldn't mind reading the final version so we can all enjoy it, I will bring it up here. All right.
Predictions of the material. Before the wick rejects the flame, before the glass salts the waters, or the rental en route to your funeral stalls, I worry the dog isn't getting enough sun, and it is midnight, but we step out anyway onto summer's chow tongue. Clouds extend the glare of lightning far off. Before flocks' heads drop, the dog sinks the anthill gathered full and quick at the Saba's trunk. Nothing swarms his leg or the river he pisses into the heart like God. No arthropod island, no insect bridge of grappled spurs. Before sunrise, I turn a burner high in anticipation, olive oil dollop ready to smother the pan. When a moth plummets to the blushing element, wings immediately charred. Let me tell you, more than once in a parked car, I've held the searing buckle to my chest. Before drive-thrus, before driveways, dribble down Filtrum, before the beach, crushing indistinguishable mounds in bare feet, a horse conch's crown, tearing skin. Even anaphora can't coax the future. You said, "Ay, mija, are you crying again?" Before dusk revealed the hook in the pelican's beak.
Excellent, thank you. So your anaphora got me thinking. Is continuing to edit a poem a form of anaphora, a type of meditation, right? These are all things we've actually mentioned in the interview. Like what is it about this revision that is both necessary and something that we do? And what does thinking you disregarded something earlier mean later when you regard it again and again?
I mean, these are all $1,000,000 questions.
I only ask the big ones.
I feel like there is, I would have never thought it that way, but I think you make such a great point that there is something anaphora-like, anaphoric, is that a word? Can we say that? There is something like that to the revision process, right? Going back again and again. Especially if you're like me, I know a lot of us poets, we poets, I know a lot of us do this where, I always get those looks when I'm writing in coffee shops because I have to like mutter the poem aloud to myself over and over and over again. And I can't go on to the next line until I've read everything. You just keep rereading and rereading and rereading. And I hadn't thought about it, but there's a kind of anaphora to the process itself, to keep repeating something over and over. And then later on, you have readings and events and you do things and you keep reading the same thing over and over again. And it does make me think about how every single time it feels like you are embodying that moment again, trying to get to something, which is why we write it down for public consumption, right? Why we share it with others, thinking that this is getting somewhere. It can get us as the poet somewhere, it can get our readers somewhere. It offers something. I don't always know what that thing is, but it feels like it's there, and something in the process of recitation, something in the process of returning, I guess, over and over again, we'll somehow find it.
Yeah.
Do we? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I keep thinking like, right, it's this sort of mantra where, we say it the first time, we are here, and we revise it, we are still here. And then, we read it uh, hundreds of years later, someone reads it, and it's like, we were there. It's some sort of affirmation of experience in life, and something that can keep resonating as long as it can resonate. I don't know.
No, yeah. I mean, Sylvia Plath's I am, I am, I am,
Yeah,
right? Also just needing the way that sometimes, or perhaps always, but in some moments more than others, we need that affirmation.
exactly. Well, I feel like this was a very affirming interview. I want to thank you for joining me and sharing predictions of the material. Um, we hope to see some more books in the near future.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's been a lovely conversation and always lovely to talk about an Afra.
Excellent. It sure is.